thanks so much for joining us for the Right Fit content series. I'm really excited to have some very special guests with me here today to share their expertise and their experience in marketing for startups. Today, I'm joined by Nikos, who's the Managing Director of Proposition Marketing, a boutique performance marketing agency based in Sydney, specialising in scaling fast-growing e-commerces and startups. Before Proposition, Nikos refined his performance skill set, helping build local startups like Class Bento, Mad Paws, and Jimmy Brings. I'm also joined by Charlie Gearside, and Charlie is the former creative director of Koala and the founder of Eucalyptus, the brand engine behind telehealth companies Pilot and Kin Fertility. Thanks so much for joining me today.
Great to be here.
So Charlie, I wanted to start with you and find out, you've used so many different marketing strategies and funnels and platforms, I'm sure, at your time at Koala and now in Kin. What do you use currently as part of your marketing mix and why?
Yeah, well, we have used, if the channel exists, Taryn, there's a good chance we've used it. We've started from the very small, so like you dip your toe in sort of generally Facebook, Instagram, the basic easy to use platforms, and then you can work your way up bit by bit to outdoor, out of home, and even TV, which we've experimented with recently on Pilot.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's more about starting small and then unlocking, earning the right to play in the bigger sort of scarier channels.
Wow. As a startup, that's a big experiment. I can imagine trialing TV.
Yeah, I think it's like you got to crawl before you run. And I think once you get the confidence up to make those bigger bets, that's essentially what they are, bets.
Right.
And you just need to find a good deal and get some confidence that you're going to get return on your investment, really.
As a startup, how do you do that though? How do you decide which of these channels to place your bets on?
Well, I think the rule number one is testing, essentially. So you want to get your messaging down pat really early. And the best way to do that is to test lots of times, to iterate really fast.
On a particular channel?
Yes. So like generally the self-service channels, and Nikos, I'm sure you agree, Facebook and Instagram are the best because you can upload your creative, change a few headlines, spend $500 and get a good sense of what's working, what's not. And then you might move to a regional radio ad because it's going to be way, way cheaper. Right. And then as long as you have the infrastructure to test whether it's a good channel or not, you sort of that's really what you want. You want feedback that something's working before you double down on it.
Okay. And looking at Facebook specifically, and this is for both of you, what do people need to know about Facebook best practices? Are there just some basic do's and don'ts that you should and shouldn't be doing when you're creating ads on Facebook?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things that people can get caught up in is content. There's a lot of, when we speak to brands and businesses, they often ask about the targeting and getting really granular with the targeting, which is great, and Facebook allows for that. But then they let go, or they do not put that time and effort into the actual creative content. And to be honest, that's what the users are going to see. That's what they're going to engage with. If you don't have that right, or you haven't got a good sense of that, all the targeting in the world is not going to amount to anything. You have to have a good grip on what your users want to see and what is going to make them kind of engage with your brand and then subsequently your product or service. So that's one of the best practices that I think, I'd like to see startups kind of engage more with, is developing content that, really they understand and that their users will understand as well. Interesting.
So more like thumb-stopping content, things that people are actually going to bother engaging with, as opposed to just trying to find these magical little targeted audiences that you can speak to.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely. Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, back in the old days of Facebook, it was fine to post an image of some shoes to advertise shoes, but I think users now are a little bit smarter than that, and they want to see content that would provide a little bit more value than just the basic product or service that a brand provides.
Got it.
Absolutely. And just to echo that point, I think the stats around advertising used to be something like 90% of advertising's ignored. And I think we're all becoming sort of desensitized to whatever's happening in our feed. You can spot ads a mile away now.
Yeah.
So if you're not working hard to like at least stop the thumb stopper, as you said, if you're not working hard to get there, then you might as well be lighting your cash on fire.
Yeah. But how do you do that as a startup though? How do you know what your audience wants to engage with? Is it about finding, I think Koala is amazing examples of this. I mean, there were so many people in this space internationally already. And really it started with a mattress, right? Like it was, how do you make content that is interesting about something that is not necessarily a super exciting product?
Yeah, I think with Koala, the product actually at the very start was kind of interesting because it was like a bed in a box.
Yeah, okay.
And then I think, showing the product in an interesting way was epitomized by the wine glass test the Danny and Mitch, the Koala boys, came up with at the very, very start of that business.
Yeah.
And that was just like an interesting way of showing that product off.
Yeah.
And that's really all there is to it. But over time, as people become more and more familiar with your product or your service, you have to be a bit more creative.
Yeah. Finding new ways to be entertaining, I guess, or informative or...
Yeah, exactly. Informative is a good one. I mean, one thing that we've learned recently working on Pilot is that it's very hard for us to talk about healthcare directly. In fact, there are regulations around it.
Right.
So what we have to do is offer some value in the form of a educational or interesting video, and then in a very indirect way talk about our product.
Okay, that's an interesting concept. So being less, I guess, advertising first and more like advertorial, I guess.
Yeah. That evokes images of like Dan Oz Direct.
True, yes.
But it's all heading that way, I think, Karen.
Yeah.
Really.
And so do you use user-generated content for that, or do you create that yourselves as a brand?
For one of our other brands, Kin, has a lot of user-generated content, which is like the gold standard, I believe, of Facebook and Instagram content, because it's raw. So that kind of footage tends to resonate when you're viewing it on a mobile. It shows people interacting with your product. It's interesting because it's real people, and you don't have to spend any money making it, really.
Yeah.
Kin gets a lot of that, and that performs really well.
Amazing. So if you're a startup, how would you go about creating that kind of content, user-generated content? Are you literally repurposing things from real customers, or are you engaging with content creators or influencers? Or I guess that's a question for both of you. How do you help startups create content?
When we usually work with startups, it's about assessing what they already have and also seeing what that startup actually does. In the case of, to use an example, Space or Parkhound, they're a parking space startup, much like Airbnb for parking. It's not exactly sexy. It's a slab of concrete, essentially. Like, to advertise it is really, really difficult. You can't just put an image of it up. You have to provide content that is, talking about the value of, driving to work or having, an extra space or saving the cash by renting your space out. So that kind of content, needs to be developed by someone who has knowledge of the business. So it's about working with, the founders or with anyone in the team that understands that, and developing a range of both written, image-based and preferably video content, which performs really well. I think for a startup to get that user-generated content in the beginning can be a little tough, but these days it's so easy to get that kind of content now with phones and everything like that. So it's quite easy to get that, whether they're testimonials or, just general reviews that are user generated. That's a lot easier to do now. And that's easier to kind of put into the funnel, especially on self-service platforms like Facebook. But with some of those other startups that do have less engaging products, you do have to think outside the box as to what else would your users be interested in. If they are interested in booking a parking space, what else do they do? Are they what kind of user are they? Do they drive to work? Do they drive to the suburbs? What would this mean for their interests? And then trying to tap into kind of exterior or supplementary interests that they might have that you could filter into that creative, really.
That's really interesting. And so, Charlie, with Kin and Pilot, two similar businesses, but obviously completely different customer bases. How frequently are you creating content for each of these businesses, and what sort of content do you create more broadly?
Okay. Well, ideally, we're shooting every week.
Wow.
Yeah. And I think that you might shoot something really good once a month,
Mm-hmm.
but I think you just need to work on the muscle of shooting every week. Even if it's just picking up your phone, grabbing the box, going to a park, getting different people to hold it, just shooting the product. And the reason for that is it kills the fear, because traditional marketing and marketing approaches is all about, we're going to shoot an ad in 3 months and we're going to put all this media behind it. And I'm really scared as a marketing manager, because what if it fails?
Yeah.
And the beauty of these platforms is that you can turn things on and off, you can test. So basically, if you get in the habit of shooting stuff every week, you won't care if it's embarrassing or if it's low quality, because you've really got nothing to lose.
Yeah. That's such amazing advice for startups, just to actually get out there and give it a shot, because I think you're so right. Like, this traditional advertising process had been hire a big expensive agency, have a 6-week production process, go out and hire professional models and a professional photographer and spend a huge amount of money. And that's your one big campaign a year, and that's all you can afford to do, which just doesn't work for startups.
And you convince yourself the night before it goes live that it's shit. And you can't sleep.
Yeah, and that you never want to see it again, and that no one's ever going to engage with it. And okay, so getting out there and just doing more.
Yeah.
And for both of you, would you have advice for startups about what is like the MVP of marketing for startups? Like, should they have a certain amount of videos? Should they have a certain amount of photos? What do they actually need just to sort of get out there and get testing?
Yeah, I mean, more the better. As Charlie was saying, you need a good spread of videos, content, even if it's just getting out there and doing it and just getting as much as possible. I think the real benefit of Facebook is you can just get out there and test, and you can test with small budgets. So you can put a small amount of money behind a whole range of different campaigns or creative ideas. If it doesn't work, fail fast.
Yeah.
If it works, double down and keep going. That's the kind of methodology that works for most of these startups, where you don't know what you don't know at the beginning. So it's about just testing across a wide range of campaign types, creative types, and whether that's a video, carousels, images. Again, some startups, they have success with others, and other startups have success with videos that are testimonials, for example, and others might have success with just a single image that's a funny quote or something. But they won't know until you just get in there, test a nice wide range of creative, and then give it a go. And what I like to kind of suggest for startups is, in the early days, have a really nice diverse spread of different content, but also content ideas, instead of having one idea with all these different little iterations. Because with a small budget, you're not really going to know if something's working on or not with all these tiny little changes. But in the beginning, if you just have a few kind of fundamental ideas, one has great engagement, the other doesn't, okay, great. You can just park that one or cut it and then just double down on that one. And then you get deeper with the testing and deeper. I think a lot of people kind of take the granular testing thing too far and test too many little things with a very small budget. I think it's fine to do that when you're a huge business, but as a startup, you don't have the time or the money. So it's easier just to go with the bigger ideas and then test those to start before doubling down.
Yeah. I think the best way I've heard that described is, that approach is, you start with, when you're chopping down a tree, you start with a chainsaw, and then you might finish with sandpaper.
Yeah.
Right.
You know what I
that
mean?
Makes so much sense. Such a great quote.
Yeah. So it's pretty country. I think it might have been.
Start with big slabs before you get down to that real granularity. Yeah. Okay. And is there a formula on what to spend? I think as a startup, we're always looking for these, someone to give us advice on these really specific metrics. Should we be sending a percentage of revenue? Should we be, is there some sort of formula that we should be working to as startups?
With startups, there's not a kind of set formula that really works. It's what I like to recommend is just go back to your core metrics. Yeah. Go back to those. If you're an e-commerce business, look at the conversion rate, look at the average order value, and then you're going to get a good idea of what those, say, clicks to the website or clicks to the platform are going to be worth. Then you can run some basic ad tests and see, okay, this is our base click-through rate. This is our kind of set CPC on these creative sets. Okay, we have now a rough idea of how much the traffic costs, how is it converting, what value is it converting for, And then from there, it's easier to model out a model that's based on return on ad spend or customer acquisition cost that kind of works. Otherwise, it's too difficult to say, oh, this is a perfect formula. In the early days of startups, you just really don't know. But if you go back to those core metrics that you can trust, you can build out something that's going to be tailored to your business. And it's just, again, the numbers are pretty basic at the end of the day. Those kind of core metrics like average cost, click-through rate, and working with those and providing some variance, of course, will allow you to create a model that kind of can be scaled.
What would I add to that? I think that's pretty much the perfect answer. I think a lot of people are scared of investing in their marketing. So I would say set aside some money to test this stuff and be comfortable with the idea that you won't get that return on investment. Because if you think from day one you are, you'll probably be sorely disappointed. And then the other thing to watch out for is that as these platforms like Facebook and Instagram become more and more popular with advertisers, they do become more expensive. So I think the era of those platforms being a silver bullet for marketing is gone, and you can actually if you're not careful, you can burn cash over a long period of time and end up with like no margin. So those are the two things that are kind of like in opposite forces, but you just need to have them both in mind.
So on that, is there new platforms or new channels that you're looking at that might provide better ROI as a startup? Like I know you mentioned TV, which for me as a startup founder seems like almost so unattainable.
Yeah, I think finding value in new channels is a real skill, and some channels are going to resonate with your audience better. I know that Pilot, for example, has had some success doing display advertising, which is stuff that at Koala we definitely sort of look down our noses at, but it's actually worked quite well there.
Yeah, that sounds, to me, that's like display. I'm like, what?
Yeah. And then like Kin, obviously having a female audience, Pinterest has worked well, and a lot of people don't know how to use Pinterest, it turns out, properly. So we're able to get good value out of Pinterest, and then you can look at even weirder positions. So urinal ads worked really well at Koala. Which is like, it was hard getting a mattress to sort of make sense in a dingy
men's bathroom.
But if your creative can actually do it in a clever way, and you don't do any brand damage, then you're gonna get like little pockets of value.
Yeah. Okay, now I have a lot of questions on that. How do you measure the ROI on something like that? Obviously, measuring online campaigns is so much easier than extrapolating out of home or in bathroom advertising.
Yeah, well, I'll explain how we sort of approached it at Koala. Is that once we were confident that it was worth a crack to do things like elevator advertising or bathroom advertising, we had to work out a way that we could measure it. See, out of home's really quite hard because people are commuting, driving past their billboards. You don't really know where they live.
Yeah.
But in an example like a urinal or a cross train track outdoor billboard, it's a pretty good guess that the people around that location are going to be living around the location of that billboard. So you just keep an eye on postcodes of people that you might use that train station.
Yeah.
And then you're looking for basically any uplift there.
Okay.
And you, to some extent, you have to take a leap of faith and know that like you're not going to be able to attribute everything perfectly.
Yeah.
But there are some ways that you can look for signs.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
With that model, I mean, a lot of people do look for perfect attribution, which I feel is kind of a fool's
Doesn't
game.
exist.
Yeah. So do you just kind of look at it in the sense of, okay, digital you can track, but out of home, if it's working, you're seeing customer growth at a steady CAC, then it's working, I guess.
I think you have to be a bit tougher than that because I think media agencies are really good at selling you stuff, that billboards that have just existed forever, but they they haven't accounted for the fact that we're just way more like used to distractions these days.
Mm.
So I personally reckon billboards are pretty crummy value, to be honest.
Mm.
And they've added more and more to the side of the road. So to get value out of billboards at Koala, what we did is we took a photo of them, and they were all like, the billboards were generally like a middle finger to the furniture establishment. And then we shared them online and put heaps of ad spend on Facebook behind them. Because in Australia, the act of putting something on a billboard is kind of like your company's way of taking a stand.
Yes.
And that resonated really well as a Facebook ad.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so it was less about the actual out-of-home
the eyeballs,
and more about being able to repurpose that content across different channels.
Yeah.
That's very, very interesting. Okay, which content works well on which channel and why for both of you? So I think this is something that every startup grapples with. Should we be creating GIFs, videos? Do all of those videos need to be different for IGTV versus Instagram stories versus YouTube? And how do we create them all, and which ones for which channels?
Yeah, great question. I think you want to have as much as possible, or as much as you possibly can get.
Yeah.
I mean, that's easier said than done for a lot of startups. What we're finding now, and what of course Facebook is recommending, is it's not just about chopping the content for certain placements, whether that's Instagram stories or Facebook stories versus newsfeed content. It's about tailoring the content to the actual experience the user might have with that placement. So if they're on a Facebook newsfeed, a kind of long form video might work a little bit better just based on the act of how they're going to be sitting, say, at a desktop watching that video. Instagram stories, for example, okay, you want to reformat the content from a physical point of view, but you also want to ensure that the user is going to have the desired action, which in the case of stories is, say, swiping up. Okay, so how is that going to make the content look? Are you going to have some video that's going to entice the user to actually do that, make that action, something moving upwards, for example? That's a kind of case of taking those placements and not just trimming the content for it, but actually creating content that entices the user's action to engage with it.
Got it.
And that's something that you're seeing a lot more of now, because we are just now getting used to these basic, boring ads, and you want ads that are more engaging from a physical way or a visual way as well.
Yeah. I think on a practical level, people freak out about that because they're like, oh, that means I have 8 different aspect ratios and bits of content to do.
Yeah, and I need to reshoot everything.
Yeah, but I think you can just be smart about how you shoot. So just having the end product in mind when you're shooting. So it's like, okay, well, we'll shoot this on a phone at the same time, like in vertical as we are shooting on a nice camera in sort of widescreen for YouTube. Or shooting a little further back on a higher resolution, so you can sort of punch in and cover all those formats. It should just be, how do I reuse the content I have rather than setting up a different shoot for each format.
Okay, so thinking about all of the different aspect ratios and channels when you're actually doing that first original shoot.
Yeah, just having a sense in your mind.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking about all of the channels at once. Because I think otherwise it does become this huge daunting process, right? And you're trying to reverse engineer, thinking, oh gosh, now I have all of these different channels, and then all of these channels that keep changing.
Yeah. Actually, you just made me think, Taryn, that like, while that's also true that you can knock it over as much heaps in one go, there are other channels that, like YouTube, for example, where the production standards probably have to be a bit higher. So like you can get away with like phone filmed user generated content on Facebook, and it probably should be a bit nicer on Instagram, but on YouTube it has to be like you're competing with like the best cat videos of all time. So it has to be a good video.
Good video,
right?
yeah.
And so I think it's like understanding levels of quality as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of each channel. Have you worked, both of you, either of you, with influencers before? And do you work with them to create content? Are you working with them to drive sales? What is it in startups that you think influencers can be used for. And I know that it's also one of those industries that's quite challenging for people to understand and maybe understand the ROI and how to measure it as well. So do you have any advice for startups in general on should they be using influencers and what can they be using them for?
Yeah, great question. I think when it comes to the startups that we work with and influencers, it's about getting as much out of the influencer as possible. It's not only about getting them to post it and share it on their platforms, but also, getting them to develop content for you, because a lot of influencers are really, really great at developing content that suits their channels. A lot better than often most startups, actually. So what we find is it's a great opportunity to get those influencers to create that content for you that you can then repurpose on your own mediums as well and hit, two birds with one stone in that sense. I think for a lot of startups, just using it for a growth channel can be a bit daunting because the costs of influencers have steadily risen over the years now. And of course, they just don't really know where to start. But it should just be viewed as a channel like any other. And with anything from UTM tags, you can track links from their pages or from their campaigns. That's not a problem. I think it's just what else can you get out of that relationship with the influencer, whether it's content, partnerships in some way that would also benefit your startup as well.
For sure. I think the content point is super well made. I think the thing that a lot of people get apprehensive about with influencers is the act of negotiating. Because you have to, if you really want to get it done for cheap, you have to sort of, you could do it on the right fit, or you can message these people. But basically, you want to make sure that they agree to do things. You have to be very specific with what they agree to do. So they'll share it on their own stories, but they'll also post it in their feed, for example. There's a big difference there, and that fine print can get lost and does get lost. And then I think the other point is on the measurement. You're right, it is super hard to measure. So you do things like get the influencer to send you screenshots of what their engagement was from their perspective. And then you just need to chuck it in a spreadsheet and crunch the numbers, really. Treat it like any other channel.
I think that's really interesting because it's exactly what we see people missing when they think about influencer marketing is firstly this idea that they can't track influencers, and secondly missing the trick that if someone's doing one Instagram post for you, they could also be creating a bank of 10 other images at the same time that you can then repurpose for display ads or Facebook ads. So how would you advise people to think about crafting an influencer brief? I know you touched on the piece about negotiation, which I think is so important, and about documenting what's been agreed. But how would you advise startups in thinking about crafting a brief and then including things like additional content creation?
Go ahead.
All right. I think it's like know what the influencer is good at. Try and maximize the amount of content you got to get out of it. So try and negotiate rights to all the images they shoot, regardless if they only post one or two. If they're shooting videos, so they might be a YouTuber, get access to everything they shoot, like all the offcuts, so to speak. Chuck them on the hard drive, have them in the office.
Wow.
That's extra stuff that you can edit from eventually. So maximize the content basically would be my main thing in the brief.
Yeah, I would say for a brief, again, looking back over what they've already done as well, and just seeing if that really fits what your brand or product is about. When they shoot videos or images, does it really match your brand ethos, your general imagery? And then you could use that as examples in the brief as well, just to have a really, really clear brief referencing what they've already done as well.
Absolutely. And then one thing that we always that we should write in briefs, but we forget, is how to show your product. Because it seems really nitpicky when it's like, no, you have to hold it like this. But it's amazing how often that gets glossed over. So it's just being really super clear of how you want the product to be shown. Do you want it to be in a bright room? Do you want to have, busy backgrounds, or would you prefer a really clean background where your product dominates the shot? don't be afraid to be prescriptive because you're paying for it at the end of the day.
Yeah. And does that come back to a brand really understanding their own brand guidelines and understanding their, I guess, visual identity?
Yeah, I think before you get to the influencer stage, you should have a sense of what product photography is going to work best for your product. So you should not necessarily, you don't have to have the most amazing high art style to start with.
Yeah.
But just like, well, when we shoot our product, we're a luxury brand, so we might shoot on a marble top rather than a timber top.
Okay.
So just like having a few ground rules like that.
And I wanted to ask this because you both have, so firstly, a men's health business and women's with Kin, and working with brands that are not so easy to promote on social, like Parkhound. Talk to me about how you go about finding influencers for both of those brands. Do you proactively reach out to people? How would you go about finding people that, for products and services that are maybe not necessarily, because I think people have this idea that influencers only work for beauty brands or fashion or things that are super exciting and visually beautiful. How do you guys go about that in your businesses?
I think it's just old-fashioned research. You got to dig around, look at news articles or articles that those people have written, especially for more specific niche startups. I mean, that's a good thing as well because there's lots of niche content creators, but you got to go the old-fashioned way, research with like hashtags on Instagram or just Google News to find those articles that they've written because, it will take some time, but when you find those ones, they'll be really, really good. And hopefully if they are niche, they might be a bit more affordable as well.
For sure. Yeah, I think the deeper you go, the more pockets of value you'll find. And I think it's fine to, if you look at your product and sort of go, step away from what your product is about and go, what is my audience into that can be completely unrelated to my product?
Yeah.
And then look in that world. So for example, Pilot, we don't do any influencer marketing yet.
Yeah.
But when we do, we're not going to look at men who are into health because we'll end up getting the gym sort of crowd, which are already getting smashed by protein ads.
Yeah.
So what we'll do is we'll probably go into blokes who are into, rugby league or AFL, just because there's less stuff targeted and less happening in that sort of space. Yeah,
definitely.
So that's, again, about coming back to really understanding your audience, which I think you touched on earlier about really thinking about who these audience subsets are and how you speak to them across different channels. If I'm a startup and I've literally just launched my product, I feel like maybe I have a bit of an idea about who's going to be buying my new clothing or shoes or soy wax candle or men's health business. How do I actually get more granular than that, than saying my customer is men who are interested in health or people that might need to park to go to work? How do I do that next level of granularity on that and work out who these people are and what might be interesting to them apart from just trying to push my product?
Great question. Difficult question as well, because in these cases, it's, these startups, you have to really start quite broad as well. And if we go back to maybe a paid Facebook ads example, and you've got $1,000 to spend, but you have no idea where they are, who they are. I at least these days have a bit of more faith in the Facebook systems as to finding that audience for you. But it goes back to your tree kind of analogy about starting really broad and then working your way in. Being a performance marketer, it's all about the data. So whatever data you can find before that process, the better, whether that's Google Keyword Planner, Google search trends, that's a good start. Facebook Audience Insights is also a good start as to kind of building that audience a little bit, but that still won't help you until you really just throw something at it and just see what comes back. But of course, that's scary, as you said before. And I think that comes back to the idea of start small, fail fast, keep it lean, and then, double down if you are seeing these learnings come through. And then compare them with maybe other learnings you're getting from, say, PR or another channel or just from general customer feedback.
Yeah.
And question about your time at Koala. When you think about selling mattresses, it's like the target audience is everyone. So as a startup, how do you go, our target audience is everyone. How do we create content and speak to everyone en masse? Or did you come and go, okay, we really need to just start with two target audiences?
I think, you start broad, but then also the trick with that is that the broader your messaging, and by targeting everyone, you end up creating an ad that is meaningless for everyone. So that's like the biggest risk. And that's the biggest problem you see with marketing these days, is that they try and please everyone.
Yeah.
And you end up pleasing no one. So like a famous example from advertising history is it's a cigarette ad. The
good old days of advertising, yeah.
That's how far back you have to go. But remember the Marlboro man, the cowboy, right? And these days marketers would go, oh, why did you make him a cowboy? Like, cowboys don't smoke that much these days. Well, it's not about that. It's about the fact that like this was someone that a niche group of people could identify with, and that they built the whole brand around it. So you have to actually target in and like mean something to a small group of people to start. And with Koala, it was definitely like the inner city, urban, sort of, inner suburbs people that we knew would be the early adopters to find that interesting. So we modeled our tone around those kind of people. And then as we became more and more relevant to the rest of Australia, we were then able to stay true to our roots, but just broaden it up slightly.
Okay, that's really interesting because it's such a broad product. So I guess what you're saying is really know who you are as a brand. Yeah,
know who you are. Don't apologise for being who you were and what worked for you at the start. Because I think people will, that will resonate with people more than you think. And the biggest risk of all is saying something that doesn't mean anything to anyone.
And that comes back to that whole content for content's sake, right? Like just churning out, everyone. I think there was that period where everyone was like, video is king, everyone needs to do video. And everyone was just making videos that no one watched and no one cared about. And brands were super guilty of that, I think.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so if you had to give one piece of advice to startups about how they go about launching a brand, or maybe they're at that growth stage and they want to scale their brand, what should they do? What sort of one piece of advice would you like them to take away from today about marketing?
For me, it would definitely be fail fast. Facebook gives such a wide, or let's just take Facebook for example, gives such a wide range of advertising tools. And that is really quite broad these days with like lead ads or engagement ads or general conversion ads. That it's great that it's a self-service platform and you can test across all of these different categories or optimization opportunities, and then also test creative across those. But the key thing here is just to keep it small, keep it lean, and then fail fast if it doesn't work. And if it works, great, you can double down. And that's what's worked for all the startups that I've worked with, which is just they don't know what they don't know. They try everything. One or two things end up sticking, and then they see that growth trajectory.
And I love that you see that as success, like that you're not getting caught up on the things that didn't work because, as you say, you don't know what you don't know yet. So not getting caught up on these things that the tests that you performed that didn't work well, they were the things that led you to understand where to double down on later.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Charlie.
Cool. If I had to tie it up to one sort of rule, I think it would be do it in-house. So whether you're just starting out small and it's, you're a one person band and it's just you, or you're a business that has traditionally used an advertising agency, I would say it's becoming easier and easier to create content yourself. Platforms like therightfit for casting and hiring the right people. It's cheap to get really great cameras. It's cheap to use your phone. Just don't freak out when it comes to marketing and don't think you have to spend heaps. The more you do in-house, the better you'll get at it, the more you'll understand it, the faster you'll do it, the better feedback loops you'll have, and then the better your marketing will be over time.
such an interesting concept because I think it goes against, I guess, how everyone's thought about the old way of doing advertising and marketing. What does your marketing process and team look like internally at Eucalyptus now?
So my background's in advertising agencies.
Yeah.
So we've tried to copy the best parts of that, but just do it in-house. And then, so basically we've got art directors and writers.
Okay.
So you start with ideas and they're sort of, they give birth to the idea. And then in terms of execution, we've got videographers, we've got producers. So it's a bit of a mishmash between a production agency and a creative agency. But then we also overlay the skill set that you would have at a performance agency. So we've got people that are actually putting the ads live, and it's the feedback loops between those people saying someone, creating something, uploading something, saying that worked, that didn't work.
So the iteration time is so much quicker.
So quick, yeah.
Wow. And is that just a case of being able to find people who are multi-skilled? Like I know you touched on it before, just the concept of even as a founder being able to go out into the park and take a photo. Is that just about, I guess, decoupling this idea of particular people having to have particular skills? Like I need to hire a marketing manager who does all of these things?
Yeah, I think there's no excuse for not being able to do a bit of everything these days. Like you don't have to be the weapon editor because being a video editor is hard. But like you'll find a lot of people who are great generalists and they can cover a few of those.
Yeah.
So that's definitely who we look for is like generalists that can do a bit of Photoshop, know how to pick a good music track. And I mean, most founders could probably string a few of those things together themselves.
And I guess you have to when you're starting out. That's the joy of wearing all of the hats in a startup, right? Yeah. Well, thank you so much. That was so awesome. I really appreciate your time today, guys.
Thanks, Taryn. Thanks for having us.
Thanks.
Thanks.